Good afternoon, Waltham Public Library fans. We apologize so much for the inconvenience. For whatever reason, our live stream was not working, but now it is working beautifully. So thank you everyone for your patience as we go. Oh, shoot. Hold on, you all can hear the thing. I can't believe this is happening. Hold on 1 second. All right, good. Well, I know it's working. Sorry about that. I apologize for everything. I apologize for my echo you just heard, and I apologize for the fact we started late. For whatever reason, our live stream is not working. We are so sorry for those of you who tried to visit us earlier today. There is a power outage at the library, and so we were not able to offer in-person services, but thanks to modern technology, usually thanks to modern technology, maybe not so much about 5 minutes ago, we are still able to offer you programming. So we are so glad that you're able to join us for our monthly YouTube show. We'll tell you what we're reading. The we in this case is me. My name is Laura Bernheim. I'm the head of reference at the Waltham Public Library. Joining me are my colleagues Louise Goldstein, Liz Rior, Amber Harvey, and Greg Carter. As always, we have lots of great virtual programming at the library. Again, we are so glad for modern technology when it works, that we are still able to offer you so much of the library. A lot of our program is featured on our YouTube channel, which you are watching right now. Please like and subscribe, ring the bell, you know the drill, and you'll get notifications. We also do a lot of great interactive programs on Zoom for all ages, including our regular book clubs. This week, for instance, Greg led a discussion about the book The Changeling by Victor Laval. Spoiler alert for Greg's slideshow presentation later on. On Monday, March 8th, you can also join us on Zoom to tell us what you're reading, not just us. Hear from your fellow patrons, as well as some of the staff you see here, as we talk about books, movies, and TV shows together. It's a bit more casual than this, and it's always a lot of fun. For all of Waltham Public Library programs, please visit our website for more information and to get the Zoom links when applicable. And as always, please support the Friends of the Waltham Public Library. I've worked in libraries since I was a teenager, so you know, a year. And the Friends of the Waltham Public Library have been one of the most generous friends groups that I've ever had the pleasure of working with and encountering. Thanks to them and their support of a professional Zoom account, for example, we are able to do live streaming of programs when that works. And they have also made it possible for our children's room to buy a lot of craft supplies that I know for the pickup runner desk have been so popular with our families in Waltham. So thank you to the Friends, and please, if you like what the library's been doing, not just the last 11 months, but in general, please support the Friends. You can just give a small donation or become a member for, I believe it's $10. So without further ado, we're going to start our program, and Louise is up first.
Thank you, Laura. Oops, I think I'm not able to share just yet. So we're going to just fix that for you. This is one of those days, guys. Not yet. Let's see. Hold on 1 sec. Now it's good. Everything is good. See, it all works out in the end. Okay, so I listened to this as audiobook on Overdrive Libby. And I recommend that, although I'm sure it's fun to read the book, but Tiffany Haddish has a great voice. She's a great narrator. I enjoyed this book a lot. Some of it is laugh out loud funny. Some of it's a little sad. She's had a tough life. She is amazing. She's very resilient. In a way, I was trying to think of books that this reminds me of, kind of sort of read-alikes, and I thought about, oddly enough, Frank McCourt's Angela's Ashes, because that's a book where somebody grows up very poor and has a kind of a great humor about the difficulties in his life and still has a resilient spirit. Also, Trevor Noah's Born a Crime, another book where somebody has some really tough stuff, but he makes it hilarious, even though some of it's very difficult. And also a personal favorite book of mine that's not funny, but has somebody with a difficult childhood, White Oleander by Janet Fitch. These are all books that I think one might enjoy if they enjoyed this book. I also want to give a shout out for a little YouTube thing that you can watch, which is Tiffany Haddish talking with Trevor Noah about this book. It is hilarious. She has him practically rolling on the floor laughing, and it's just a lovely way to start off this book. She in her childhood, her father left at a very early age. Her stepfather was a philanderer. Her mother was in a car accident and suffered terrible brain damage. She was in and out of mental institutions. She would say verbally abusive things to her kids. I don't think she understood what she was saying. And then she ends up in Laugh Factory comedy camp one summer. And Richard Pryor, the now deceased but always beloved Richard Pryor, was there. And she's telling jokes, and he's in his wheelchair because he got sick later in life. And he's like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" She's like, "I'm telling jokes." He goes, "No, you're not." And she's like, yeah, I'm telling jokes." And he's like, "No, you're not." And she's like, "Yeah, I am." And then finally she says, "Well, what do you think I'm doing?" He goes, "You're only telling jokes. You're not here. People don't tell jokes to tell their sad stories about their lives, talk about politics, none of that. When you're telling jokes, you have to enjoy yourself. You have to really be enjoying yourself. That's the only way to do it." And she kept this in her mind and in her life, and it shows. She when she's telling this story, she is enjoying herself. I want to give a couple of warnings about this book. One is she is not politically correct at times. She talks about somebody with a disability. I found it a little bit funny and a little bit upsetting at the same time, both. So it's just a sort of a warning. I feel like I'm going to cut her so much slack because she's being funny. She's been through a really tough life. She had some really difficult relationships with men, but in every case, her good humor, her strength of spirit, get her through. I personally loved it. I recommend it highly. Okay, this next book, I am listening to the audiobook. Again, this is on Libby Overdrive. There's a slight waiting list on this one. So if you want to get it, you just have to wait, not that long, but there's a little bit of a list. This is an interesting book. This is by Kim Stanley Robinson, who I had never read before. I guess friends of his call him Stan, just in case you're ever out one day and you see him, just say, "Hi, Stan." Don't say, "Hi, Kim." Because I was watching him on a YouTube talking about his book, and they were all saying, "Stan is about to talk." So he's Stan. He is wonderful. He cares about so many things that apply to our lives now. Okay, by the way, important. This is a book that deals with climate change. So if you're feeling like, hey, I want something really light, funny, escapist, this may not be the book for you. In fact, I started it and put it down, and for a chaser, I knew that my colleague here, Liz, had recommended Red, White, and Royal Blue. And so I listened to that entire book on audio so that I would be amused. And then I came back to this one. So that's how I dealt with it. I like it a lot. It has several narrators because there are several characters in this book. They all live in the same building in New York. In this case, sea levels have risen and risen. And so it's almost like Venice in New York, right? You have to get everywhere by boat. And not so surprisingly in this novel that the very wealthy are doing a lot better than the very not wealthy. And we have a range of characters who are living in this book, some who are wealthy and some who are not. We have two homeless boys who are somehow sort of living in this building. And there's an old man named Mr. Hexter, who's not well-to-do, who befriends the boys, and he's delightful. He has a huge collection of maps in his room, and he has books, lots of books. He's clearly very intelligent, but unfortunately his building kind of collapses because of all the water. Like even when they would visit him, it smells like mildew in there because there's all this water, and he's not wealthy. It's a really interesting book, and there's a wonderful character whose name is Amelia, who is maybe my favorite character. This is so crazy. She's like an internet star, and she has her own airship, and she's interested in saving animals while filming, like polar bears who are endangered. And there's this amazing, crazy scene where she's flying around. She has all these polar bears, and they get loose, and she has to like not get hurt by a polar bear and put tranquilizer darts in them and keep flying the ship and announce everything to her public. And she's amazing. She manages. So this book is it's got a humor to it. And after my initial shock, I kind of got into it, and I don't really find it depressing anymore. So I recommend it, again, with all the warning notes that I've given. I think he's a very good writer, and I think he, and in fact, I know he's been honored. Not only has he won Hugo Awards, Nebula Awards, but he's also been asked to go on trips to Antarctica with scientists, because he writes very well about climate change, and scientists respect him. So a good new author for me. Okay, now this is a good pandemic read. You're looking for something light, this is the book for you. This is not even a long book. This is a book from an author named, again, I'm not sure I'm going to say this correctly, Toshigazu Kawaguchi. And he is from Japan and originally wrote this book in Japanese. It's been translated recently into English. This is his first novel. He's known in Japan as a playwright. I love this book. This book you can get from Hoopla. Again, I listened to the audio on this book, and I loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. Did I tell you I loved it? It's such a fun book. It's got this little cafe that's called Funicula, and it's in a basement in a back alley in Tokyo. And apparently, according to the book, it's been there more than 100 years. And there's sort of a urban legend about it that you can go back in time. And a newspaper reporter went there to try to find out about it, but he couldn't find anybody who had actually done it. And apparently there are such strict rules about how you can go back in time. You have to sit in one particular chair. You have to, when you go back in time, you have this cup of coffee and you have to drink it before it gets cold, otherwise trouble. Witness the ghost who lives in the cafe. She is always sitting on this one particular stool, which happens to be the stool you need to use if you're going to go back in time. And there's only one way, one time, one moment when you can go back in time. Or in one case, go forward in time. She sits there, I know she's a ghost, but she sits there drinking coffee, and once a day she uses the restroom. So she gets up and goes to the restroom, and that's when you can sit in the chair and go back in time, and you have to follow all the rules, and you have to understand another rule, which is you cannot change the present. So even you go back in time, you can't change the present. Oh, and there's one other thing. You can only talk to people who've been in the cafe. So if it's someone who's never been in the cafe, you're out of luck. So our first woman goes there and she's meeting her boyfriend, and she thinks this is going to be a romantic day, that he's going to pop the question. She's so excited. and they want to go to their cafe that they usually go to, but unfortunately it's closed. So they find this place, they go down to the basement, and sadly, he tells her that he got a job in New York developing a video game that he really wants to work on, and he's going to move. And she's so shocked, she doesn't know what to say. And he's like, "Oh, I'll pay for the coffee." And she's like, "No, I'll pay. You don't have to." She's just so upset. And she's having trouble concentrating and sleeping. And she comes back to the cafe, and she's the first one who decides she wants to try the time travel. And we have 4 vignettes that are, I think, very moving and touching, of people who want to do this time travel thing, who are willing to follow the rules. Oh, by the way, this is hilarious. One thing, if you're planning to get the ghost woman out of her chair, you don't ever want to be like, get off, or push her off, because if you do, she'll put a curse on you, which is kind of a problem. With the first time travel that happens, and you're kind of like, I mean, I told my colleagues I have a trigger finger right now. It's kind of like your whole body is like, you know. So I totally recommend this. Great read, short read, perfect for pandemic reading. Okay, so this book, this is one of the few lately that I've read in book form. This book is a reissue, actually, and it was originally, it's actually still called Night of Camp David by Fletcher. I think you pronounce it Knebel, Knebel. It was a bestseller in 1965, and it's been reissued. The premise, what would happen if the president of the USA went stark raving mad? Perhaps some might understand why that might be thought about, but during this time when he wrote this book, the 25th Amendment was literally, or in the book, during the novel, the 25th Amendment is actually in the process of being ratified. And Jim McVeigh, who's this successful senator from Iowa, who's, oops, surprise politician, having an affair, and the president, President Hollenbach is his name, calls him in for a private meeting at Camp David, and president wants him to be the new vice president. There's been a bit of a scandal with the vice president, but the way he's talking about it, and he's talking about this idea he has, which is that the FBI, this he thinks is a good idea, FBI could like tap everybody's phone. Isn't that a good idea? Wouldn't that be great? And he has these other ideas that seem kind of off. And he's kind of overreacting to his vice president, who didn't really mean to sort of breach this particular law, but kind of did. But it's not that serious really, but he's kind of overreacting. And he doesn't know that Senator McVeigh is having this affair. And the senator knows that if he finds out, it'll be over for him. But he's talking about how he wants to have this union of the United States and Canada and Sweden and Norway, Denmark, and some other places, and how if they don't go for it, he's going to use military force to do it, and maybe he'll be in charge of the new union. So McVeigh's a little worried about his sanity, and we go from there. I couldn't put it down. I really liked it. Apparently, Rachel Maddow talked about it on her show too. I couldn't find the clip of her talking about it, but the author actually did work in Washington in his day. He was a journalist and he knew a lot of the players, and he writes really well. And so those are my recommendations. And with that, I would like to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Laura. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Louise. As always, those books all sound very interesting. The one about the coffee getting cold is very intriguing. I definitely want to check that one out. Okay, let me share my screen. Hopefully something goes right technology-wise. And sorry about the Louise with the share screen. That was my fault. Because of our issues I had to restart the Zoom meeting in order to correct the issues with the YouTube. And what happened is it went to the default where participants cannot share their screen. So everything is going to be hunky-dory for the rest of the video. That's my, not really promise, that's my pledge to you. So anyway, moving on. My first book is You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey by Amber Ruffin and Lacey Lamar. Amber Ruffin, a lot of you may recognize her as a writer and presenter on Late Night with Seth Meyers, as well as the host of her own show, The Amber Ruffin Show. I first came across her from her very funny late night segments, Amber Says What, and Jokes Seth Can't Tell, and became delighted and gladly followed her when she did get her own show. She still is on late night as well. Ruffin has never shied away from commenting on race relations and racism in this country, usually using a lot of her wit and humor to discuss that. I very much recommend her late night videos from June. She did a series on late night about the encounters she's had with the police over her life. They are all available on YouTube. Unfortunately, we can't screen share anything from other properties because of copyright, but I encourage you to look them up. And You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey. Ruffin and her sister, Lacey, detail the racism that Lacey has encountered in medical care, work, shopping, in other words, everyday life in the Midwest where she lives. But a lot of this sadly could probably happen anywhere. The stories about Lacey being accused of shoplifting multiple times at JCPenney as a teenager are mind-boggling. The stories about Lacey finding out years later at a doctor's appointment that she once had kidney stones years ago, only because another doctor noticed on her medical chart and casually mentioned it to her, but she was not told of her diagnosis at the time. She just thought she took some medicine, and then some stomach issues she had, which were horrible, just went away. Never told she had kidney stones. That was horrifying. Though these stories are very much written with humor in a way, Ruffin's usual humor, I, especially as a white person, I feel like I don't have the right to call this book funny. It's easy to laugh at some of the people who Lacey encounters, especially at her job. These people she works with are amazing and not in a good way. A lot of the anecdotes are just so downright awful. And as I always do, I always second guess myself and I wonder and worry, have I ever said or done anything as ignorant as the people in this book? And I like to think I have not, but you know what? It's not up to me to make that judgment. And so a book like this always makes me rethink. My one regret about reading this book, if you will, is that I did just that. That is, instead of reading it, I wished I had listened to it on audiobook because Ruffin and Lamar are both the narrators. And to use a trite phrase, I could listen to Amber Ruffin read the phone book, let alone a thoughtful book such as this one. I also really enjoyed watching a variety of interviews with the two sisters. They have great chemistry and their relationship it's great. And I bet that would have come across really well in the audiobook. So the book is pretty, I'm enjoying it. I don't even know if that's the right word, but so I might check it out on audio, even though I'm reading the print version. Next up is Bingo Love by T. Franklin, Jen St. Ange, and Joy San. This book is heartwarming after starting with some heartbreak. Hazel, or Elle, so this is Hazel, and Mari meet and fall in love in the early 1960s, but family and societal pressure forced them to separate. After several years of being married to men and having children and grandchildren, the two women meet again at a bingo game. Bingo, that's the name of the book, is actually where the relationship blossomed as younger women and teenagers, really, because they used to go with their grandmothers. And I won't give away any more than them reuniting, except to say the rest of the book and the ending are beautiful and just hopefully true, as in true to life. Hazel and Mari's families are great characters as they learn to accept the truth about their mothers and wife, in the case of Hazel's husband, who's a pretty well-developed character. I also love the fact that a lot of this is the story of a mature couple I'm not saying old, I refuse. I wish more romances delved into love stories of characters who are well beyond middle age, having like a healthy and vibrant love life. And as with a lot of graphic novels, this art gives a larger context to the story. And the art is just gorgeous. I mean, you could probably even just tell by the artwork just on the cover here. And as people know, like I do judge books by their cover. This is available on Hoopla to check out anytime, which Waltham residents have access to. I actually discovered last night when I was putting my thoughts together for this video that the Jackpot edition of Bingo Love is also available on Hoopla. I don't think that was there earlier. That contains a lot of bonus material, so I know what I'll be reading this weekend. My third book is We Could Be Heroes by Mike Chen. I was actually telling Liz and Greg before we went live that I think the two of them would really like this. So meet Jamie, aka the mind robber, a villainous, and I'm putting villainous in quotes, bank robber, and Zoe, aka the throwing star, the superhero in pursuit of the mind robber. However, before donning their supervillain and superhero personalities, they both woke up with no memories. They're given places to live and had their powers, but also a lot of questions. They meet at a support group for people with memory problems, and they figure out who each other are almost immediately upon meeting each other. And after using their powers to save others in their support group, they team up to figure what on earth is going on and actually become friends. It may seem that we're oversaturated with superheroes in our films and TV shows. I mean, I can't stop talking about WandaVision, for example. But you know what? This is a really fun and different take on the superhero genre. Chen writes about a serious situation. I mean, losing your memory, definitely a serious situation, but writes with a lot of warmth and humor. And this character-driven and descriptive novel, I think would convert anyone who doesn't know the difference between Marvel or DC. And my last book is Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. I was very excited for this book. It's the prequel to The Hate You Give, also by Thomas. I follow Angie Thomas on Twitter, and she posted a lot as she was writing this novel, so I felt like I was following the development of this novel with her and her 10,000 other Twitter followers. But, you know, of course, I feel as it's a symbiotic relationship. It's basically beneficial for me. She gets nothing out of me being her follower. The book, though, is the story of Maverick Carter, who you all may know as the father of Star Carter, who is the protagonist from The Hate You Give. 17-year-old Maverick has just found out that he's a 3-month-old baby who he named Seven. We met Seven as a much older character in The Hate You Give. Star's older brother, and his whole life must change as he takes responsibility for his son. I'm still in the middle of reading this novel, but I'm really enjoying getting to know several of the adults from The Hate You Give as their younger selves, as they come of age and turn into the adults that we see in the previous novel. Thomas is great. She really presents a strong sense of place, as well as, and she's excellent at character development. I think being familiar with The Hate You Give adds context to the book, but you can definitely read this on your own. I think you can read and enjoy it without being lost or confused, without even having picked up The Hate You Give. That being said, you should read The Hate You Give because it's amazing. So you should read it anyway. And actually, those are all my titles. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pass this on to Liz.
Hello, everybody, including my sister in Chicago who's watching. Hi, Lulu, I miss you. All right, now that that's done, I am going to share my screen and we are going to learn about some good books, not so good books. So let's do it. All right, my first book that I'll be talking about is Frank Herbert's Dune, the graphic novel, book 1. Adapted by Brian Herbert, who is the son of Frank Herbert, the original author of Dune, and Kevin J. Anderson. Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson collaborate a lot on books in the ever expanding Dune universe. It's illustrated by Raoul Allen and Patricia Martin. I think Greg or I talked about Dune at a previous one of these will tell you what we're reading, so I won't go into too much detail, but basically it's a graphic novel adaptation of the book Dune by Frank Herbert, my favorite book of all time. The artwork is lovely. It has sort of a dreamy quality to it. For those who aren't familiar with the story of Dune, basically, it's a lot, but if I could sum it up in 2 sentences, it would be intergalactic battles over substance that makes you really, really powerful, and hijinks ensue. That's actually only 1 sentence. But it's great. I love sandworms. I love science fiction. It's great seeing different visual representations of the characters in Dune, particularly one of my favorite characters, Lady Jessica, who is the mother of Paul, who is the sort of hero of the story, although if he is a hero or not, that could be up for debate. So that's just my first one. I'm also not done with it, so I can't really tell you how accurate it is, but it's a nice little appetizer before the Dune movie comes out in the fall, hopefully. We'll see. It's been pushed back multiple times. My next book is also science fiction. This is Lucifer's Hammer by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. This book was originally published in 1977, so it's an oldie, but not necessarily a goodie. It is considered a classic, however, so I will give it some respect for that, but oh boy, can you tell it was written in the 70s. I first tried to read this book in high school back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I only got halfway through. And then just recently, I was like, you know what, I need a book about a comet hitting the Earth and everybody dying. Bad choice, because this book goes on and on and on. So basically, a comet is discovered. The people of Earth get really excited because they think the comet won't hit them, but it makes people really interested in space and NASA and exploration. Spoilers, the comet hits the Earth and it's like humongous. So there's global flooding, firestorms, earthquakes, billions of people die. And then after it hits, we follow some of the survivors who are conveniently all the people we encountered before the comet hit. This book has everything. It has cannibals, it has religious mania, it has people surfing on tidal waves that destroy Los Angeles, but despite all of that, it still manages to be super boring for everything other than when the comet actually hits the Earth. For example, I had a friend in junior high who went to see Titanic in the movie theaters, and he thought the best part of the movie was when the Titanic sank, because that's when the action was. And this is like the Titanic of science fiction books to me, but less sad because a lot of innocent people die in this, but this is fiction. The Titanic actually happened. Anyways, you can skip it. If you want to read a book about the end of the world, let a reference librarian know. We can recommend several. All right, the next book I read, The Troop by Nick Cutter. This came out a few years ago. This book is disgusting, and I absolutely loved it. I listened to the audiobook on Hoopla, which Waltham residents have access to. Massive trigger warning for this book. If you don't like violence against children, really gory stuff, torture, don't read this book. It's not going to make you happy. It's going to make you very unhappy. So in this book, a troop of Boy Scouts camping on a remote island of the coast of Canada find themselves in a Lord of the Flies meets the Hot Zone situation when a parasite-riddled stranger arrives. These are boys who are about 13, 14, 15. So they're Boy Scouts, they're not, Cub Scouts or whatever the under Cub Scouts are. They're young teens. So they're cut off from the rest of the world, and it is a fight for survival that is just consumed from within by paranoia and insatiable tapeworms. I just want to reiterate again, this book is so gross. It has some of the most extreme body horror that I've read in a while. So if you are at all squeamish, this is one to avoid, but it is also, I think it's so well done. 10 out of 10 disgusting slime-covered stars to this book. My last book is on like a totally different end of the spectrum. It's Muriel of Redwall by Brian Jakes, which is one of the novels in the Redwall series. I think chronologically it's like number 6, maybe, number 4. So recently, Netflix announced a plan to adapt the Redwall series into a movie and streaming series. So I loved this series as a child. So I decided to revisit my favorite volume, Muriel of Redwall. For those unfamiliar with the Redwall series, and there's over 20 books in it, I believe, it's sort of a reimagining of medieval England where all the characters are animals. It's centered around Redwall Abbey, which is inhabited by mice, rabbits, badgers, and others. And, you know, they wear clothes and they brew beer and they go to masses and they do all human things, but they're cute little animals. So this book focuses on Muriel. She's sort of like a one-off character. Sorry, I just lost my place in my notes. Okay, this is from the back of the book. Hapless voyagers, Muriel and her father, Joseph the Bellmaker, are mercilessly thrown into the sea by pirates. Muriel washes ashore, starved and near death, her father missing. She's taken in by the hospitable inhabitants of Redwall Abbey. Sure that her poor father is dead, Muriel swears an oath of vengeance against the filthy pirates who killed her father. With the help of a motley band of animals, Muriel leads the charge to recover a bell and avenge her father. End quote. This was one of the first sort of fantasy books I read that had, even though she's a mouse, a strong female protagonist, and also had a strong female protagonist who takes charge, never gives up, and importantly to me, accepts help when she needs it. So I highly recommend it. It holds up very well to me. It's very nostalgic, and it was a nice little palate cleanser after reading about teenagers killing each other because they're being driven crazy by worms in their stomachs. So, what a journey. All right, I'm going to pass it on to my coworker, Amber. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Amber, please tell me something good.
Thanks, Liz. It's going to be tough to follow dead Boy Scouts. And did you say the mice drink beer or they make beer? This is your tough act to.
They're very self-sufficient. They brew their own beer, or it might be mead. I forget what it is. Then they make bread. It's very charming.
You are a tough act to follow, as always. I will try my best. My first book, let me get started here, is Are We There Yet? By Kathleen West. This novel provides a relevant look at parenthood through the lives of 3 modern families. It's told from alternating perspectives, and we meet Alice, Meredith, and Nadia, 3 women who became friends when their children entered kindergarten together. Those kids are now in junior high, and the women quickly learn that the kids' friendships are not the only relationships that are shifting and changing. Alice is an interior designer who's struggling to balance her full-time demanding job. Her husband is always away on business, and she's a mom to 2 children. Underneath her impeccably designed appearances, cracks begin to show after her son commits an act of bullying towards a classmate. So in addition to trying to come to terms with her son's changing moods and behavior, her mother unveils a family secret that will permanently change their family dynamic. Meredith is the tiger mom who runs a very tight ship and has complete control over her daughter's life, or so she thinks. Her only child, Sadie, is an honor student, star ice skater, and is on the school's quiz team. Meredith accesses Sadie's grades regularly through the school portal. She monitors her daughter's social media presence, so she thinks. And each night at 9, she feels a sense of accomplishment as her daughter's phone shuts off thanks to an app controlled by Meredith. Her perfect life is upended when Sadie sends a naked picture of herself to a classmate. And Nadia's son, Donovan, is regularly in trouble at school, and both Alice and Meredith outwardly show support for their friend over glasses of wine at the local wine bar while secretly breathing sighs of relief that their children aren't the problem children. And we all know what happens to people in glass houses. I find that books like this often, the characters are characters rather than real relatable characters. However, in this case, I felt that I could replace the characters' names with names of moms I know. My children aren't as old as the children in this book, but I think we all can deal with or relate to the effects of social media. It's kind of alarming learning what kids do. I think it really, this book really it did a great job of showing a glimpse of modern life in terms of parenting, friendships, and families. Are We There Yet? Comes out on March 16th, so it's not out quite yet, but it is available in the catalog if you'd like to place a hold on it. My second book is called Royal Voices. It's a collection of stories edited by Nora Shalloway Carpenter. And let me start by saying this review will be a little bit of a confessional for me. As I was watching the riot at the Capitol last month, a woman appeared behind Martha Raddatz and she yelled at the camera. And I immediately formed an opinion about her and where she was from. And later on, after the events and everyone was trying to process what happened, I came across commentary from Sarah Smarsh, who is a journalist I really respect. She wrote the award-winning, or I think it was a National Book Award finalist. It's called Heartland. She's from Kansas. And she was quick to admonish those who were assuming the rioters were all basically hicks from the sticks. And truth be told, it was a real wake-up call to me, especially as someone who grew up in a small rural town. So when I came across a review for this book, I knew I needed to read it. In the pages here, we meet teens who gather at McDonald's each morning before school so they can access the Wi-Fi before they drive 1 hour to their private school, which they attend on scholarship. We meet a young man bravely coming out to his Catholic family. In another story, a high school senior struggles to feel a sense of belonging in the small town where she has lived since she was 3, because unlike everyone else she knows, she was not born there. And, you know, this story, this one in particular, hit close to home because, like Alina, the young woman in this story, I had a similar experience because my family, the town I grew up in, my family moved there. My parents moved there, and, you know, we had no extended family, something that when you're living in a town of 5,000, you kind of always stand out as different. And this story also was set in West Virginia, and I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. And, you know, I could probably still, unfortunately, it's not something I'm proud of, recite all of the jokes about West Virginians that some of you may be familiar with. So this book's a real eye opener. I knew I was going to do it once. Royal Voices contains short stories, poems. Some of the chapters are even graphic chapters. And all of the authors here either grew up in a rural community or they lived in one long enough to identify as a rural American. And it is labeled as a young adult book, but, and don't be mad at me, Laura, I don't always read young adult titles, but I just wanted to say, don't let the label dissuade you from reading this really important book. It's really, really just, it's a powerful read. All the stories, I'm not quite finished with it. I have a couple more left, but all of them are so well written and so just really well done. And my last book, I tend to always have a new cookbook at home that I'm looking through. This one is the Taco Tuesday cookbook. So in my normal life, Tuesdays are my late night at the library. So I never get to participate in Taco Tuesdays. But with the pandemic upending regular life, I'm currently at home in the evening. And so I've kind of made it my mission to celebrate Taco Tuesday every week. And although I still don't know how it's possible, my kids have started grumbling that they are getting tired of the same old taco recipe. Enter this book. It's full of simple but tasty recipes, and it's really added some variety to our taco nights. There are recipes for beef, chicken, pork. There's also meat-free options, seafood options. The first recipe I made from this book was for blackened fish tacos, which was win-win because my kids ate fish and I used up the white fish I'd been ignoring in my freezer probably for too long. This book is written by Laura Fuentes, and she also includes recipes for seasonings, sauces, salsas, guacamole, and most importantly, margaritas. I love that there are 52 taco recipes here, so you can kind of use it one for every week of the year. My Taco Tuesdays won't last forever. The library will go back to normal hours soon, hopefully. At some point they will. And even when that happens, you can be sure that I will continue to enjoy tacos on another day of the week. So I don't know, Taco Thursday maybe. Doesn't have quite the same ring, but it will serve the same purpose. And with that, I will turn this over to my colleague, Greg.
Thank you, Amber. Yeah, I have to admit, one of the happiest moments of my life was finding out I did not have to choose between seafood or tacos. I could just have both. It's the simple things in life. Okay. And on that note, we are going to go to my PowerPoint presentation. And play from beginning. Okay. So I am going to cheat because one of the things, the first book that I'm going to be talking about is the one that I actually just talked about for the Science Fiction Book Club, The Changeling by Victor LaValle. However, it's, I think, such a powerful novel that I just kind of had to share it. I like Victor LaValle a lot. One of the reasons, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name properly, so I do apologize if I'm doing it wrong. But I first was introduced to him when I read his novella, The Ballad of Black Tom, which is a take on H.P. Lovecraft's short story, The Horror at Red Hook. It is considered by many to be a rather racist and offensive book as of these days, and Victor LaValle took, as a result, changed it to being the perspective of an African-American man in that story. I thought it was very powerful while being terrifying and also a biting criticism. So I was very excited to read his next book. So The Changeling is about a man by the name of Apollo Kagwa and his wife Emma. Apollo is a book seller and buyer living in New York City, and he's making a comfortable living to support his wife and child, Brian, and but things start going really, really well for him when he happens to find a first edition book of To Killing a Mockingbird that has been autographed by Harper Lee herself to Truman Capote. Suffice to say, that is going to be making them quite a bit of money. And they're going to be able to buy a place in New York as a result of that, which is very impressive. And then, so things are looking up for him. However, until his wife's mental health starts to deteriorate, she is beginning to not sleep. She is having stressful dreams. She's convinced somebody is watching them. And worst of all, she is convinced that Brian is not their child, that Brian is not their baby, and she is even refusing to call Brian by his name. And Apollo's obviously very disturbed by this and is threatening to separate. And then what happens? And then Apollo comes home only to be to discover that Emma has killed Brian in an incredibly horrific way. And after that awful experience, we flash forward to a couple weeks later, where Apollo is dealing with an awful situation. His wife has disappeared. He's just buried his child. He is at a loss of what to do. And he discovers from a stranger that he knows where Emma is, and if he wants, he can take him there. And so Apollo goes on a hunt trying to locate his estranged wife and confront her, and you get the sense that it's not going to be a pleasant confrontation. However, that's where the story begins to change, because you would think this is going to be originally a story about revenge, but things as he encounters new people and different locations and places that shouldn't be, Victor begins to learn that Emma's been in contact with people, people who kind of live on the fringes of society. He begins to discover there's a little bit more going behind the scenes, and maybe most frighteningly of all, Emma might not have been wrong. And that's where I don't want to give too much more away, because this book is as much as a drama and an urban fantasy. It's also a mystery, and I have a lot of feelings about this book. I think I liked it. I think I liked it a lot, but it made me feel quite a few things. I got very angry at this book. I got very hopeful from reading this book. I'm not exactly sure I have formed an opinion exactly, which I know I feel like is a cop-out, but really it's one of those books that I have to analyze and rethink and study over and over again. It's a very powerful take on motherhood and fatherhood, and it is really something to study. And more important, and perhaps one of the ongoing themes is, as a dark fairy tale, it has a lesson to be told. Like, one of the big things in a fairy tale about monsters or vampires or fairies is that they're really powerful and they're really scary, but in order for them to get you, you have to invite them into your house. However, when you have something like the internet, it's essentially a giant doorway into your life. You put things online about yourself. You put social media posts, you have bank account information. So that physical barrier no longer becomes a safe haven for you. And it is a rather chilling, so it's kind of cool how it combines modern technology with the folklore of old. But I would say I really liked it. A disclaimer though, if you have trouble with like violence against children, especially against young children, this might be something to pass. I know that I had to put down the book after reading that part of the story. It was pretty heart-wrenching. But so you might be asking, Greg, that was really depressing, and that was pretty heavy. So did you do any light reading? And I'd say, yes, random person that I'm making up. I did do some light reading to, calm my nerves, and that was some cosmic horror. Moving on. Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. This story is, T. Kingfisher, also known as Ursula Vernon, is a author who wrote The Twisted Ones, which was one of my favorite books from last year. And this is kind of a spiritual sequel, I would say. It's about this woman by the name of Kara, and Kara has just ended a rather, it was not, it wouldn't, I would not say it was a, it was not a, well, it was a rather lousy marriage. She's just gotten out of it. She and her husband have separated. They've tried to be friends, which is kind of making the situation even worse. So she decides that, but she doesn't really have a place to stay. So she thought about moving in with her mom. Unfortunately, though, she and her mom do not get along at all. So she moves in with her Uncle Earl, who is a kind-hearted man who runs a museum. However, Earl is, while he's very kind, he's quite the oddball, and he does not run like a natural history museum. He runs the Wonder Museum, which is filled with the occult. It is filled with like random artifacts. It's filled with a ton of taxidermy, like so much taxidermy, which is always a win-win for a horror novel. And Uncle Earl also tends to believe in everything. Like he believes in every religion, every government conspiracy, every like monster that you can think of. He's not a big fan of evolution, but he eventually comes around to it because, as he says, well, of course, we're descended from primates. How else could you explain Bigfoot? I mean, that makes perfect sense. So anyway, Earl has a bit of an accident, nothing like serious, but enough that he has to stay home, and that leaves Kara to run the museum. And she happens to find a hole in the wall, and this hole leads to another dimension. Essentially what she calls Narnia. You know, there's a Narnia in her, like, in her attic. However, while she's exploring it, it turns out to be a, well, what she calls evil Narnia, because it is just kind of like these vast plains with surrounded by copious amounts of water and beaches, a lot of creepy looking willow trees, and abandoned buildings and bunkers. And it soon becomes apparent that there is something living in these willows, and it is not friendly at all. It's in fact very hungry, and the thing on the menu is people. And if it's not hungry, it's an even worse situation for you, because it likes to play with its food. So that's, and it's pretty disturbing, like a lot of body horror, though not as awful as the body horror of the Troop, but that's really not saying much. It's still really gross. So Kara has to find a way back home before these things find her, which might be a bit of a problem, because when you think about them, that attracts their attention. And I don't know about you guys, but I think it would be very hard to not think about something that's trying to eat you. And it's in the same proximity. So will Kara get out of this? Well, I guess you'll have to find out, but it's very humorous. The only criticism I could say about it is that it does almost seem kind of like the exact same structure of the Twisted Ones, where you have a protagonist who has just left like a problematic relationship, a weird family member, a dimension, even a goth barista. But it's but because of Kingfisher's writing, you really like the characters, and as a result, I'm very forgiving of it. Plus, the horror has amped up a lot. Like, it is very disturbing. Yeah, thumbs up. And finally, last but definitely not least, I decided to read an oldie but a goodie, The Devil and Daniel Webster by Stephen Vincent Burnett. It was written in the 1930s, and it was a short story, so I figured I'd give it a shot. So for those of you who don't know it, it pretty much takes place in like the early 19th century. A man by the name of Jezebez Stone is a New Hampshire farmer. Life is not treating him very well. He's kind of a joke to his friends, family, the town. Isn't making a lot of money, so he one day in frustration says, I'd sell my soul if it meant that I could make a profit or something. And so, how these things go. If you say that, Satan's going to show up, which he does. And he goes, hey, I'll give you like 10 years of, a successful life, but after that, you're coming with me. Guy is Stone's not very bright, so he says, sure. 10 years later, after a successful life, Satan shows up and he's like, all right, time to go downstairs. And he's like, oh no, this is not good. So thankfully for Stone, unlike every other poor, idiot who would be in a situation like that, he happens to be next door neighbors with the Daniel Webster, like the US Senator who was the Secretary of State for 3 presidents. And he's a lawyer at the time, and he tells him that of his situation. And Daniel Webster's like, okay, I am going to take your case, and we are going to take this to court. And so there's a whole trial about saving this man's soul from the devil. It's definitely from the 1930s. There are some things that have not aged as well. Just haven't aged well, like some of the wording and some of the some of the opinions of folks. But what I'm also impressed by is how some of it has actually stayed legitimately up to date. It's ultimately, it's a question of American patriotism and whether America is inherently good or inherently bad. Webster would have you think that ultimately we are good. Satan would point out the biting criticisms. There's one of the best quotes of this whole thing is when Webster's explaining to the devil that he can't take Stone's soul because, you know, he's a foreign monarch, so therefore no American citizen can like do that. And Satan's like, what do you mean? I'm very much an American citizen. He's like, when the first slave ship set off for Africa, you know, I was at the bow, you know. He's like, I've been here for the whole time. He's like, the North finds me, thinks I'm a Southerner, the Southerner thinks I'm a Northerner. And he's like, but truth be told, I'm one and the same. And it's kind of a question of, and you know, honestly, it leans a little bit more towards the optimistic, but it does bring up some interesting points. Also, it is all the jokes and humors here is pretty much New Englanders making fun of each other, which I'm always a big fan of. So if like, because it's written from a New Hampshire perspective, expect Massachusetts and Vermont to get mocked and criticized several times, but in a hilarious way. So yeah, I'd say give it a read. Also was a pretty fun movie. But that's all I got. And done.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to go into gallery view so we can have a conversation. As always, such a wide range of titles and books. Always enjoy hearing about them and always adding some books to my to be read list, which always gets bigger and bigger. I still have some books from the beginning of the pandemic that I meant to read, and they're still on my to be read pile because then I find more that I want to read. So thanks for adding to that. I'm very excited. I really just love all the range that we bring here. It's fantastic. Anyone want to comment or have questions about anyone's books before we discuss movies and TV? Just say thumbs up. Yeah, go ahead, Greg. What are you gonna say?
Yeah, I know I keep bringing it up, but that, Liz, I gotta say, I have a strong stomach for horror, but yeah, no, that is something else. The troop, oh God.
Yeah, I was not expecting it to be quite as disgusting as it is, because horror is, as I think I've said before on this, like, is the primary genre that I enjoy in across all media.
Same.
So like, I've seen a lot of horror movies, I've read a lot of horror novels, but this one was just, was like the disgusting cream of the grossness. It was great.
See, that's the difference. For me, it was one of the few books where I was reading and I'm like, I'm out. Nope, that's it. Done. I admit defeat. I don't do it often, but you know, well played, book. I'm never picking you up again.
I listened to it on audiobook, which might have helped, because like once the word happened, it was like I couldn't reread the sentence over and over again to know how gross it was. It was like, okay, that happens, but I'm on the train going forward.
Oh, that's probably a good point.
Yeah, I have to say, this discussion makes me not want to read that book, but that's okay. Different strokes for different folks. I think I'll stick with Tiffany Haddish from Louise's suggestions, or the coffee being cold sounds more my speed. I do like some gross, but if it's too gross for Greg, I feel like that's a pretty big barometer for me. So yes, I'm gonna take Liz's word for it and know to recommend it to people who might have various reading tastes, but probably will not add to my repertoire. So that's good. One fewer book to add to the ever-growing to-read pile. So moving away from reading, who would like to share a TV show or movie that they've been watching? I have one, but I'll share it a little later. Working up not being embarrassed about it. But anyway, go ahead, Amber.
I think I arrived late to this party, but I am completely obsessed with Escape to the Chateau. Is anyone watching this show? So it's on, I'm watching it through Peacock, but I believe it's also airing on PBS. It's a British couple who, I think this was in 2015. They were looking for a place in France, and they found that they had the budget for this chateau. And, you know, I think it was 280,000 pounds, which I'm not sure what the exchange rate is today, but I don't know, like $525,000, which really for this 45 room, 5-story chateau on a moat doesn't seem like a lot, right? But it's basically been, you know, no one can afford to keep them up, which is why it was such a bargain. But anyway, so this show follows this couple and when they first arrive, they've got like a 9-month-old and a 2-year-old, and they're going to renovate this chateau, and they want to have weddings and events there. And honestly, it was almost anxiety inducing initially, because I can't stand chaos and mess. And, you know, they're living in one tiny room while they're trying to, you know, break down stone walls. And anyway, it's really good. There's only 3 episodes a season, so it moves pretty quickly. And I almost wish we got more detail of the renovation. The gentleman is a retired Army engineer, and he designs a heating system for this chateau, so they don't have to use just the fireplaces because there's no heating system. He I believe does something with the bathroom system that they have to have. They end up installing an elevator, because how are they going to get people up to the 5th floor? And it's literally a tube. And he explains the physics or the science behind it a little bit, not a lot, but just enough to kind of it just make it a little bit more interesting. But it's like a tube that just sucks you up the turret, as you will. So I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you. One thing I'll recommend, I'll start with the not embarrassing thing that I'll recommend is there's a documentary, Code Switching, which was part of the Boston Globe Black History Month Film Festival. It was actually recommended by someone in one of our book club discussions from this past month. It's about METCO students. If those who are unfamiliar with that program, it's students who live in the city, usually Boston neighborhoods, who are basically our students at suburban schools in Massachusetts. And the code switching, basically, it's how they're, I'm just going to quote directly from the Boston Globe website, explores their lives and the positive and harmful effects of constant code switching. As they sometimes drop elements of their culture, language, and behavior to fit in. This was actually the basis for the novel. The reason I'm trying like this is I have the novel literally over here. Don't Ask Me Where I'm From by Jennifer De Leon. She was actually a speaker with our teen Real Talk program that was on YouTube. She had been in real life, she had been a METCO student, and that was the basis for her novel, which I actually is on my to read pile, and that one I am going to read definitely. But the documentary is very interesting. The event on the Boston Globe, you will, has passed, but if you still RSVP, they'll actually send you a link to the documentary. It's also playing constantly right now on the various local PBS channels. I just DVR'd it, is how I was able to access it. So you might be able to access it that way. So the one I'm a little bit embarrassed about, but you know what I'm not embarrassed about, is the Punky Brewster revival. And someone got up early this morning. It basically debuted on Peacock early this morning, I think at midnight. Maybe it was 3 a.m., might have been midnight in LA. And I'm on episode, so I got up early. So early this morning, I watched, before the actual day started, I watched 3 episodes. And it's cute. I mean, it's what you expect. It's basically, for those who don't know Punky Brewster, and if you're not my age, you may not, I think Soleil Moon Frye and I are, I think, exactly the same age. She may be a year younger than I am. Punky Brewster was in the 80s. She was a child who her mother basically abandoned her at a grocery store, and she ends up being fostered and later adopted by a man named Henry Warnemont, otherwise known as the guy from the Police Academy movies. That was the 2 things I knew George Gaines from as a kid. He's actually a very serious Shakespearean actor, but everyone knows him from Punky Brewster and Police Academy. And you know what? He was able to have any role he wanted because of those 2 things, so good for him. I actually loved the show. I rewatched the original show leading up to the revival. I think what I liked about it was, or what I appreciate it as an adult, is I really like that it talks sort of about the non-traditional family. in addition to Punky living with Henry, a single father, a single adoptive father, her best friend Cherry is being raised by her grandmother. And the four of them sort of form this familial unit. And I think it's really a great message. I think that, I mean, there's a lot of that show hasn't aged well. It's from the 80s, and nothing from the 80s ages completely well, but I think that message has aged very well. The new version, Punky and Cherry are still there. Unfortunately, George Gaines and Susie Garrett, who played Cherry's grandmother, have since passed away, so they are not in the show, although they are referenced. And Punky has 3 children who she had with her ex-husband, played by Freddie Prinze Jr., which I don't know why that just delights me that he's in the show. And Cherry actually is a social worker who works at Fenster Hall, the foster group home that was mentioned a lot in the original show. And she finds there's a little girl reminds her a lot of Punky as a child, and so, spoiler alert, not really. Punky ends up being a foster mother to this child along with her other 3 children. And, you know, it is what it is. But I'm enjoying it. I would like to see more of Cherry. I find I'd like to see her more as just the sidekick friend role. I feel like in the original show she had more of a role than that. So far she just really seems to be the supportive sidekick character. So I like to see that explored more. I do like the fact that Cherry is in a same-sex relationship and has been for a while. Like it's not, I thought there'd be like a big story with her coming out, because I had heard that she was gonna have a girlfriend in the show, and it's just who she is, and it's already been established before the show, and it's just, I think that's great. So was it worth getting up really early? Maybe not, but I was excited for it. Anything else? Because I will talk about Punky Brewster for an hour, and I don't think anyone wants to hear that. So.
Yeah, I guess I've got something. I'll be tactful about it. So I'm watching a Netflix show, The History of Swear Words. So, hosted by Nicolas Cage, no less. And it pretty much is kind of like, it's the first season, and it's pretty much about swear words and where they come from and how they originated, and why they are found to be particularly offensive. Because some are pretty obvious. Others, though, when you start thinking about it, it's like, why do we find this word particularly offensive? Because there are words that mean essentially the same thing, that if we say them one way, it's fine. If we say them in the other, we're like, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. It's a very interesting, kind of amusing take. Nicolas Cage is being Nicolas Cage and loving every moment of it. They have comedians there, but they also have, professional linguists and folks like that who delve into it and explore it, and also asking questions like, is this word going to be offensive in like 30 years, or is it going to be going the way of other words where it's acceptable, or what words are going to be considered really offensive? Because essentially it's what culture deems as acceptable and not. It's really, I sometimes feel like it can be a little, they rely a little bit on gimmicks, but the ideas and the focus of what it is interesting, and kind of funny, because it's one of those like, haha, these words are bad, but then like, oh yeah, why are they bad? And I've been having some fun with it. And one last thing is, each episode focuses exclusively on a particular word. So when you when you turn on Netflix, it's like, what's the title? Oh, that's the title. And it's just, so it's kind of fun.
Nicolas Cage talking about the history of swear words sounds like something I never knew I needed before. I really, I need to watch that show. Liz, did you want to?
Yes, I have 2 things. They're both on HBO Max. The first is Judas and the Black Messiah, starring Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield, about the assassination of Fred Hampton. Fantastic, such a good movie. so like beautifully acted and written, and it has all these like tiny little humanizing moments that I think are pretty often left out of films about like historical figures. Absolutely love it. It will make you very angry. But after I watched it, I requested a lot of books about the Black Panther Party just to get a better history, a better knowledge of their history, and you know what they contributed to the United States. And it's so good. I cried a little bit. And then the other thing is the Harley Quinn TV show, which is a cartoon that is not for children. I'm going to repeat that. I'm not a parent, but I'm going to tell you, don't let your kids watch the Harley Quinn TV show on HBO Max just because it's a cartoon, because there are a lot of F-bombs in there, among other things. Very violent, also gross, and I, unsurprisingly, adore it. It's fantastic. King Shark is the best character in it, in my opinion. It's about Harley Quinn, formerly the Joker's girlfriend, who breaks out on her own and decides that she is going to be as evil as possible so that she can join the Legion of Doom. And the show is her proving to the other villains of Gotham City that she is a force to be reckoned with. And it is chef's kiss.
Thank you. That sounds really, both of those sound really good. I've been very curious about Judas and the Black Messiah. I was reading an article about that movie, and I know Fred Hampton's family was very much consulted about it. And really, I think they had been rightfully, I think, political and historical figures are always worried about when their loved ones are brought to the screen, because biopics are always super accurate, as we know, not. So I think my understanding is they've been very pleased with the movie. So that says a lot. And I shamefully really didn't know a lot about Fred Hampton either. So I've been wanting to watch that. And I was joking in our Zoom chat that Nicolas Cage can tell us all about the swear words, which are in Harley Quinn. You can maybe, not for children. So this has been great. Any final thoughts or, and hi to Liz's cat. Hi.
This is Goober, everyone.
Hi, Goober.
He's very stinky today.
Does Goober have anything to share, books or anything that he's been reading?
He hasn't been reading much, but there's been some construction happening outside. So he's been watching a lot of construction videos, i.e. through the window. So he's just really into like how holes are dug and then filled and then dug again.
Well, it's great. You know, he should talk to our children's librarians, because we have a lot of books in our children's room, and that's a good segue into our staff at the library are always happy to actually set you up with the best book for all ages, and even maybe not for Beyond Humans. So anyway, thank you for joining us. Again, I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties at the beginning of our presentation, some of which beyond our control, some of which totally my control, the echo and the screen sharing issues at the beginning. So we thank you all for joining us and for staying with us. Please, our next YouTube show is on Wednesday, March 24th again, live streams at 2:30. Hopefully, but you can always watch it afterwards on demand, or you can join us on Zoom on Monday, March 8th at 7 p.m. if you want to talk with us live and not in person, but on Zoom. We are always happy to talk with you, and that's always a fun event. I really encourage people to come to that. We do not record that, so if anyone's concerned about that, that is completely unrecorded. We don't play it on YouTube. So so please join us. The Zoom link is on our website, both in our book club section and on our events calendar. And with that, we are going to end our live stream. So take care, Waltham patrons, and we will see you later. And we're off.